Hello, friends, again. So today we're going to talk about the CGL policy in this module. And the CGL policy can be a complicated policy. Usually I do this in about 6 or 7 hours, but I'm just going to give you an overview of what you need to know for the state tests. Sound fair? Because I'm sure that's really all you want to know, just enough to pass the state test. So I think this will really help you narrow down those key points. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go off video so that you can concentrate on the PowerPoints, and then I'll come back to you at the end. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here, and we are talking about the commercial general liability policy. Now, again, you're in the right place. If you've been struggling with that property and casualty pre-licensing state exam, you have a self-study or classroom class, and there's so much material, and you want to try to figure out what is important. And you want a streamlined approach to what is important on that state test. So especially with CGL, we definitely need to narrow it out. So I'm Tammy Grisso-Delore, your instructor, and I've been in the insurance industry for over 30 years. And I've been teaching insurance classes for 27 years. I'm actually a subject matter expert for Pearson VUE. I've purchased several insurance agencies in addition to owning this insurance school. So the reason why I tell you that is because I want you to know that I'm in the trenches with you and I can use real life examples. So I'd love for you to follow me on Facebook and LinkedIn as Tammy Delore Insurance Educators. My motto is preparation, repetition, and confidence. Repeating things over and over again, reading them 3 and 4, 5 and 6 times. That's what it takes to pass this test. So inhale confidence and exhale doubt. If you want something you never have, you have to do something you've never done. And that's so important in studying for this exam. It is a tough exam, but hey, you're going to get through it, and it's definitely worth plowing through and really putting your attention focused here. So if you are not micromanaging, but doing several things, I want to have you come back to me and really concentrate on this commercial general liability, because again, it can be a complex subject, but we're going to make it as simple as we can to pass your test. So on your commercial general liability policy, now we were talking about how we'll insure commercial risk either on a BOP or a CPP. Now your BOP has the Section 2 coverage as well, and it has Section 2 commercial general liability. Remember, your BOP is that great policy that has a lot of coverages for less money, and it has a Section 1 and a Section 2, and your Section 2 is your commercial general liability. So what are some basic hazards that are under your commercial general liability? What are some exposures you can have? Well, remember, liability is all about third party bodily injury and property damage. So this is a business and they need to protect themselves from these things happening, from slip and falls. So this is your premises and operations exposure. This is pretty much what every business could have. For example, John is injured when he slips and falls on a newly waxed floor in Joe's appliance store. You could have a products and completed operations exposure. Usually this is when a business is manufacturing or making a product. It could be making widgets. It could be making automobiles. It could be making food. And for example, here is this exposure would be a claim against Sam's Bakery for the sale of spoiled bread. Also, some hazards are some things that could happen to a business is contractual. They could just be brought into a lawsuit because of who they are. Now, this contractual is very, very complicated. So you just really need to be able to eyeball lease, easement, sidetrack agreement, elevator maintenance agreement. So this is like, for example, a landlord and tenant, where maybe a tenant is brought into a lawsuit that is really not their fault, but because their name's on the building, they are brought into a lawsuit. So they can go under the landlord's policy, or the landlord could go under the tenant's policy if they aren't at fault. And this is where you hear the terms additional insureds. Now, an easement is a right to use another person's land. So again, they can be brought into lawsuits that they were not negligent on. So they would go under each other's policies to be able to defend themselves. Same thing with a sidetrack agreement. This is common for a manufacturer or distributor of goods to use railroads for shipping. So if one of them is in a lawsuit because of something the other one did, then they can go under that person's policy and be protected. Same thing with an elevator maintenance agreement. So I just want you to be able to eyeball those. All of the following are insured contracts except that type of thing. Also, a company could have some liability exposures because of a contingent situation, like a general contractor who's responsible for subcontractors' faulty work on a wall that fell on some visitors. Just because they are associated with them, they could be having some liability as well. So again, all of these are hazards, all of these are exposures that a company could have with third-party liability. Now, the general liability policy can be included in that CPP because we're going to write each policy separate if it doesn't fit in the BOP. Or it is also can be in that business owner policy as part of that Section 2 coverage. So again, you have if it's on a CPP, you have your common policy deck, common policy conditions, and then the CGL deck. Now, the CGL can be written either in occurrence form or a claims made form. So what I'm going to do, just like your homeowners could be written in different types of forms, and your dwelling and your business personal property, is I'm going to tell you what is common among these policies, and then I'll tell you what the difference is between those. 99% of the policy forms that you guys will be writing will probably be on the occurrence form. But for what I'm going to talk about, I'll tell you how they differ. And first of all, let's talk about how they are similar. Now, your CGL form provides three coverages. Coverage A, which is bodily injury and property damage. Now, remember, bodily injury even includes death to a third party. Property damage is damage to someone else's property. And you have your premises, your operations, your products, your completed operations, contractual and contingent, all of the hazards that we just went through before. Now, unlike your homeowner policy that does not have personal injury and advertising, your CGL does have personal injury and advertising. So it covers liability arising out of such offenses as libel or slander. Some examples would be innocently arresting someone that could cause harm to their reputation, and they did not steal, and you arrest them. It doesn't even have to be a public figure, it could be anyone. So the main thing you need to know is not for the state test is not necessarily what it's covering, because it covers libel and slander and things like that, but what it isn't as well. So anytime you hear the words knowingly, you know that it's not that. If the insured knows it's false but publishes anyway, that is not covered. When you see the word intentional, that is not covered. Okay, so these are things that are not covered. Knowingly inflicting injury that violates the rights of another. Oral or written publication of material that the insured knows is false but publishes anyway. Intentional slander statements. Again, this is liability arising out of this is what personal injury is not. Okay, material that was published before the effective date. Failure of goods and products or services to conform with advertised quality. That's why a lot of times on these diet pill boxes, they'll put, these are not the typical results and that type of thing. Incorrect price descriptions. If you meant to put $100 on an item and you put $10, that is not something that's going to be covered under this. Unauthorized use of another's name or product in the insured's email address, domain name, or meta tag. So again, not only do you need to know that it's libel or slander and it's not intentional, or arresting someone that was innocent and it's not intentional, you also need to know what it is not. So again, look for these words knowingly and intentional and those types of things, because those are definitely excluded. So you have coverage A, which is bodily injury and property damage to a third party. You also have coverage B, which is personal injury and advertising. And then you have coverage C, which is medical payments, because not everything you are going to be legally responsible for. Someone is on your premises and they just slip and fall, and it has nothing to do with what the insurer did legally, and they could not be legally responsible for. So it would be med pay in this particular case. Now, medical payments are made without regard to fault. So that is part of your med pay. They just were on your premises. Now, here are some exclusions under coverage C medical payments. Insureds and employees, again, they cannot go, you can't sue yourself, so it won't be MedPays. If an employee gets injured, that of course is going to be workers' compensation. Anything that occurred to a person while he is taking part in athletics. A lot of times you'll have a company picnic, and if someone was injured, a third party, because of this picnic, it will not be covered. And war. So these are some exclusions under your Coverage C MedPay. This is just for that customer that comes on the premises and they slip and fall, and the insured was not negligent. Now, remember, we've talked about supplemental payments quite a bit. This is an extra bank that's in addition to the liability limits. That's for claim expenses. And in the CGL policy, you have defense cost, and it's unlimited. You have $250 for bail bonds. You have bonds to release attachments. You have reasonable expenses, like if you were to be called to some type of deposition, they would give you $250 per day for loss of earnings. So it includes pre-judgment and post-judgment interest. It includes all your defense costs. And remember, with supplemental payments, these are in addition to your liability limits. Now, when we talk about who is an insured, what we're really saying is who is protected under this policy. That's what we're really talking about. So the name insured, whether it's an individual, partnership, joint venture, limited liability, a trust, whatever it is, they are protected if they were to get sued. Employees are protected if they were to get sued within the scope of their employment. So if they are operating a forklift and the pallet falls on a third party and they sue the business and the employee, then the employee is also covered for this. Volunteers, a lot of businesses have volunteers, and if a volunteer negligently injures a third party, then they would be protected under this policy, as well as a spouse performing duties related to the insured's business. So if the spouse were to come in and maybe they're doing some computers, programming some computers, and they cause negligence to a third party, then they would be covered as well. So these are people that are protected under this policy if they get sued. Now note, if there has been a CGL loss, do not admit negligence, and insured does not need to obtain legal defense. There's no need to provide estimates. What do? You report and file the claim immediately. That is one of the first things that you are going to do there, is because this could be a test question. You don't need to obtain legal defense. You don't need to provide estimates. You report and file the claim immediately. Now, how do the limits work? The limits work totally different here than they do any other policy. The CGL policy is general aggregates, and they have 2 general aggregates. And this is the most that will be paid for the sum of coverages: A, which is bodily injury and property damage; B, which is personal injury and advertising; and medical payments. Now, when these limits are done, they're done. Unlike in the auto world and in the homeowner world, remember, the limits reset themselves and start back over again. You have 2 aggregates, and then you have a per occurrence that will limit it, and each occurrence makes up the aggregate. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over to our whiteboard and just kind of talk to you about how this works. So think of it this way. You have a general aggregate here, okay, and then you have a products and completed operations aggregate. So we'll just put products and completed aggregate here. Now, when you're thinking about your general aggregate, I want you to think about slips and falls. And I want you to think about personal injury and advertising. These are the things that will pay. Now, what happens here is you also have this each occurrence limit. Now, this is not a bank. This is what you're going to look at each time they have a loss. Okay, so what happens here is these occurrences make up these aggregates. All right, so if, for example, you have someone and they come in and they slip and fall, okay, and let's say the slip and fall is a $125,000 claim. How does that work? Well, let's say that your each occurrence limit here is $100,000. Now, your general aggregate and your products and completed operations aggregate are always the same limit. Now, your each occurrence limit has to be that same limit or less. So just for example's sake, I'm going to give these two 300,000 and at each occurrence 100,000. So what happens here is you look at your each occurrence limit, and the max you can pay for one occurrence is 100,000. So what will happen here for this slip and fall is it will pay out 100,000, not 125, but 100,000. And you will go ahead and put that, and we'll call this number one. Okay. So what will happen here is you'll go ahead and put this under your general aggregate, and that would be $100,000. So now you only have $200,000 left on this policy period. So see how that works? It goes against a bank. So let's say you have your second claim and it's a manufacturer product and the product explodes. And we'll just say, it's 75,000. So again, you're going to look at that each occurrence limit. Can you pay out 75,000? Yeah, you can pay out 75,000 because you have up to 100,000 for an occurrence. So yeah, it will pay out 75,000. In which aggregate are we going to put it against? Yeah, we're going to put it over here under our products and completed operations aggregate. Okay. All right, so again, you have two aggregates here. Your occurrences make up these aggregates. You're going to decide which aggregate you're going to put it in. And when it's done, it's done. Totally different than your homeowner and your auto world. So go back here to our PowerPoint presentation. All right, so that's how your limits work. Now, before we get into some other things, we need to have some definitions what these things are. So what is mobile equipment? How does that work? Well, mobile equipment is bulldozers, farm machinery, forklifts, and other vehicles designed for use, and really it's about principally off roads. And the reason why we need to know that is because mobile equipment is covered under the CGL policy for certain things. What is your covered territory? It is United States of America, Puerto Rico, and Canada. What are pollutants? Means any solid, liquid, gaseous, or thermal irritant or contaminant, including smoke, vapor, soot, fumes, chemicals, and waste. And then we talked about employees and how they are not considered under this policy. They go under workers' comp, but a volunteer worker is not an employee. Remember, a volunteer worker will be covered if they get sued under this policy. Now, what we need to know when it comes to CGL is there's some very, very, very important exclusions. So when you keep this in mind, think that a property, when it comes to exclusions, the reason why you have these exclusions is because mainly the CGL is covering bodily injury and property damage to third parties, and think slip and falls and products and personal injury and advertising. And if it's not that, then it's probably not covered under the CGL. It's probably covered under a different policy. So professional liability is excluded. Malpractice, errors in omission, all of that goes under a different policy. Liquor liability, if a company gets sued because they serve too much alcohol, they need a liquor liability policy. The CGL is not going to pay for that. The cost to recall. Now, if that particular recall caused bodily injury and property damage to a third party, then it's covered. But just the cost to recall all that product is not covered. Okay, so if there was a high chair out there and a baby was injured, then of course that would be covered. But just the cost to recall it now is not going to be covered. This is a very important exclusion: care, custody, and control. So what is in that insured's care, custody, and control, or that client's or claimant's care, custody, and control, will not be covered. And I give you an example. If a product explodes, for example, a blow dryer, the blow dryer will not be covered, but the bodily injury and property damage will be. So if they're drying their hair and they burn their hand and they throw the dryer up against the wall to be dramatic, then that bodily injury and property damage would be covered, but not the blow dryer itself. Intentional is not covered. Workers' comp and employers' liability is not covered. If employees get injured, that's the policy that's going to cover it. Any pollution. If a manufacturer has some pollution and third parties are out there saying that this pollution is contaminating their waters and they sue the company, that is not covered. You have to ask yourself, was it a slip and fall? Was it a product? Was it personal and advertising injury? Again, you have pollution liability. You have aircraft, auto, and watercraft policies, so they're not going to be covered here. Now, mobile equipment transporting is not covered. Okay, so if you have a piece of mobile equipment, you put it on a trailer, you're driving, and that mobile equipment falls off the trailer and damages someone's property or injures someone, it is not covered. That is business auto. But, okay, but mobile equipment, while it's in operation, is covered under the CGL. Okay, so if you've got someone and they're lifting a pallet and they let go of the pallet and it hits a third party, all right, that will be covered. That's bodily injury and property damage. But mobile equipment while it's being transported would be your business auto. Of course, war is excluded. Property damage to the insured's product and work is not covered. For example, if someone is building a building, like a contractor, and they put all the framing up and a big windstorm comes in and knocks down all the framing, that is that insured's product and work. That is not a slip and fall. The product didn't damage or injure someone. So that would be under a builder's risk. That's what builder's risk policies are there for. Property owned by the insured's own property is not liability. That would go under a commercial property policy. So you need to be able to eyeball all of these exclusions. Again, this care, custody, and control exclusion, damage to property, a lot of this is because you have other policies. You have installation floaters and Bailey policies and things like that. Now, when it comes to what is the difference between an occurrence and a claims made form, most of you will be writing an occurrence form. The difference between the form is the way coverage is triggered or activated. So an occurrence form, coverage is triggered by damage or injury that occurs during the policy period. There is coverage for any covered occurrence that happens during the policy period, even if the claim is made after the policy expires. So, that's kind of a unique thing. So what you have here is kind of going back to, let's go back to our whiteboard here. And I want to go over how this works. So let's say that you have a policy and you have a 1, and it doesn't have to be 1/1. Matter of fact, we'll make it February 15th. It doesn't matter. It's just, but it goes for a year. So maybe we have a policy from February 15, 2018. And then that's the effective date to February 15th, 2019. Okay, and then we have someone that slips and fall or bodily injury, and maybe that occurs on, and we'll just say 6/12 of 2018, and they don't report the claim until the next policy period, and they don't report the claim until 4 or maybe 5/12 2019. They report it after the policy period. Okay, so what happens here is we'll call this policy A, and then we're going to pick this up and renew it here. And so we'll call this policy B, and so that will be 2/15/2019 to 2/15/2020. Okay, so if the bodily injury occurs here in this policy period of 6/12/2018, but the claim is not reported until this policy period, which bank, because remember they're banks, are going to pay for the claim? And so what happens here under the occurrence form is the occurrence form says, when did the bodily injury and property damage occur? So the bodily injury and property damage occurs during that policy period. That is the policy period. That is the year that it's going to pay. So when did the bodily injury and property damage occur? And that is policy year A. So policy year A would pay. It doesn't matter when the claim is reported. Think about don't think about statute of limitations, but it's always about when the bodily injury and property damage occurred. Now, that's a little bit different than claims made. And again, you don't usually see claims made policies. Usually see these for malpractice, liquor liability, and things like that. But with a claims made policy, it's all about, just like it said, the claim is made during the policy period. Okay, so again, if you have policy year A, and we're just going to use the exact things that we had before. So if you have policy year A, and you had 2/15/2018 to 2/15/2019, and then we're going to pick it up and do a policy year B, and we have 2/15/2019, again, just the same exact years to 2020. So again, our bodily injury occurs on 6/12/2018. And then we report the claim on 5/12/2019. Now, what happens here, for every claims made policy, we have something different. We have what is called a retroactive date. We don't have retroactive dates on occurrence policies. And the retroactive date is usually the year that they started business. So the retroactive date never changes as far as you're concerned. It does for very rare occasions, but as far as you're concerned, it's going to stay the same. So this retroactive date is here, and then it's going to stay the same for this policy period. So what you have to ask yourself is two questions, and it has to pass both of the tests. Okay, did the bodily injury happen after the retroactive date? And then, was the claim reported during the policy period? Okay, it has to pass both tests. So did the bodily injury happen after the retro date? Yeah, the retro date is 2/15/2016. The bodily injury happened on 6/12/2008. So it definitely passed that test. So yes, we're good there. Was the claim reported during the policy period? Yeah, the claim was reported on 5/12/2019. So this is the year that pays, is when the claim is reported. So with occurrences, you're always looking back. When did that bodily injury and property damage happen? It doesn't matter when the claim's reported. With claims made, is the bodily injury has to happen after the retroactive date, but was that claim reported during the policy period? Now, let's say that they retire or they go out of business, all right? And let's say that they do not report this claim, okay? Or let's say they do not report the claim until, we'll say they report it on 3/15/2020. So if they report the claim until 3/15/2020, then they would have no coverage because it did happen after the retro date, but the claim wasn't reported during the policy period. So what you have to do is you have to buy a supplemental tail that gives it a forever, basically, situation, of course, limited to statute of limitations. So as long as a bodily injury happened after the retro date, then it will pay. So anytime somebody goes out of business or they're retiring, they'll need to buy one of these supplemental tails, and they will have to pay for it. Okay, because what it will do is it will pay for it will pay on this policy period all bodily injury and property damages that happen after the retro date. And this is only if they go out of business. Now, there is a basic tail, and basically it is worthless and it's free, and it's a 60-day 5-year tail. So what it says is, if you have any claims that you think, or any incidences that you think will be claims, you have 60 days to report those. And if they turn into claims within 5 years, it will pay for them. And of course, we all know that it's hard to do that. Most people, can't come up with that. They don't know who's going to turn a claim and who's not. So going back over here to review, when it comes to the state test, the main thing that you need to know is, with an occurrence form, that injury has to occur during the policy period. It doesn't matter when it's reported. Even if the claim is made after the policy expires, it always, when did the bodily injury and property damage happen? And that's the way you're going to be writing most of these policies. Now, with the claims made, this was a little bit different. Remember, what happens here is you have your retroactive date, and this is the date that the injury has to occur, and it is on or after this date. So you have a retroactive date here. You don't have one on the occurrence form. You have extended reporting periods. Now you have this basic extended reporting period here that we talked about. That is a 60-day, 5-year, and it's available automatically and free of charge. But what you'll want to do is if they go out of business or they retire, you'll want to put a supplemental extended reporting period endorsement. This gives it an unlimited extension. As long as those bodily injury and property damages happen at or after the retro date, then it will be covered forever. And again, most of your policies that you guys will be writing will be only for your occurrence deal. Okay. So a little bit of a review here with limits. An insured has a $15,000 per occurrence limit and a $25,000 aggregate limit on its liability. How much will the policy pay for each loss? Well, again, what's going to happen here is you're going to look at the $15,000 that you can pay only, even though you have a $25,000 occurrence. So we're going to max this out at $15,000. And then you're going to look at the next one. You can pay $3,000 because we can pay up to $15,000 and you still have some aggregate left. And then on this one, we're also going to pay on it because we can pay up to $1,500. So we'll pay $1,500 here. Okay. And then this one here, we only have $5,500 left. So we'll go ahead and pay on this one. And that's all we can pay. And then there won't be anything left for this occurrence because we've maxed out our $25,000. So remember that even though you have a $25,000 aggregate, and again, this is an extremely low limit. Most people carry millions of dollars of limits, and then they put an umbrella on top of there. But I'm just illustrating to you how these limits work. Okay. So now, for your CGL policy, some of the major things that you need to remember for your CGL policy is, it's mainly about slips and falls. It's mainly about someone, are they manufacturing a product? And is there personal injury in advertising? There's two different forms. There's an occurrence form and a claims made. Is it bodily injury and property damage to a third party? Is it personal injury in advertising? Not only know that it's libel and slander for something an insured unintentionally does, but also know what is excluded when it comes to personal and advertising injury, because that's just as important on that state test. There are medical payments. Maybe the insured is not legally liable. Somebody just slipped and fell on their premises. Keep in mind that you have that extra bank of supplemental materials. Who is protected? Individuals, partnerships, employees, as long as they're within the business, even spouses. Volunteers are protected if they get sued. So all of those people are protected. Also know that the limits work totally different than they do in any other policy. You have two aggregates. One's a slip and fall aggregate, and one is a products aggregate. You look at each occurrence, and then you'll assign those occurrences to your aggregate. Your mobile equipment, as long as it's in operation, it will be covered under the CGL. Be sure to eyeball these exclusions. These are things that are not covered. Again, it's mainly about slip and falls, products, and personal injury and advertising. Then you have your two forms. So the occurrence form is all about the bodily injury and property damage happening during the policy period. It doesn't matter when the claim is reported. Claims made is the bodily injury and property damage has to happen after that retroactive date, and the claim has to be made during that last policy period. Of course, if they retire or go out of business, you're going to want to buy a supplemental extended reporting period. It does cost money, but it gives them an unlimited extension. With the basic extended reporting period that comes with the policy is 60 days and 5 years. It's available automatically and free of charge, but it just does not give them that protection that they need. Okay, so I'm going to come back to you. Turn on the video here. So that is a lot of information on the CGL, and the CGL can be a very complicated subject, but Keep in mind, you want to keep it simple. You want to really, this outline that I've given you is exactly what you need to know for that state test. So I'm going to share my screen here and kind of do this last page. So keep in mind with your CGL policy to, these screens, these 16, 15 slides are really good slides for you to study. Go over the material in your book, do your test questions, and, just really know what those exclusions are. And keep in mind, it's all about slip and falls. It's all about products that they manufacture. And it's all about personal injury and advertising. Okay, my favorite saying is we generate fears while we sit, we overcome them by action. So keep studying, keep plugging along, and I will see you in the next module.